on, guys? Today I want to share with you a project. It is our 2024 Dark Horse Mustang, and this car was purchased with the intent of doing upgrades and modifications just for you guys to enjoy and for us to gain knowledge. So with this car, we plan to develop products and take this car to events. We're actually going to use the car. We're not just going to use it for show. We're going to put it in autocross. We're going to take it to some road race events. We're actually going to use this car, and we're going to test our products as we do it. Not only that, we're going to be making modifications to it using other companies' products, particularly companies that we sell their product. So in doing that, what we've decided to do is have a series, a YouTube series, for you guys to follow along with. So every time we make a change, every time we go to an event, any footage that we can gather from either working on this car, developing parts, testing parts, or just enjoying the car to its fullest, we want you guys to be able to follow along with that. So the first thing we're going to do to this car is pull the transmission out of it. I know, a big job for the first thing we're doing, but the reason we're doing that is because we're actually going to test fit a couple of clutches for a couple of clutch companies that we represent. And you know, I reached out to those guys and I said, hey, we've got a 24 up Mustang. We can do some clutch test fitment for you to verify your product before you actually release it and put it on sale, if you hadn't already done that in the field. I'm taking the transmission out anyway because we're going to develop a release bearing setup for this and some hydraulic lines and things like that first and foremost, because that's one of our things that we do the most of. And while it's out, why not just go ahead and bolt a couple of different clutches in it and make sure everything fits for those guys as a consumer trial run is what I'm going to call it. That way that they can guarantee that they're getting a good product out into the market, and we can guarantee that we're selling a good product in the market. So the first thing you got to do when you take the transmission out of these things is pull the exhaust off, and I've already done that prior to the camera showing up. Very heavy. Be careful doing this. Probably want to have somebody help you do this part of it, but basically on a newer car, and this goes for anything, whether it be Camaro, Mustang, import, anything rear-wheel drive, just about is going to be set up similar to the way that these cars are now. And when I say similar, what I mean is typically they all have this saddle type gas tank. They all have some type of IRS, or some of them still have solid axle, but most everything has IRS. Shout out to Ford for keeping an 8.8 for so many years. Totally great rear end and no need to change it, so excellent work by them. Yeah, so something cool about this car too that I discovered when I was taking it apart is the differential cooler. So it's got this core here for cooling the differential fluid, and it has a little electric pump here and these nice aluminum lines and things that go to the diff for pickup and return. And it's kind of nice and neat and tucked away, and I kind of noticed this grating and this plastic behind it to let air out that passes through it. And the rear diffuser piece that's bolted to this car from the factory actually has these cool little tunnels in it that direct air through this cooler. So I thought that was pretty cool. But you can see right here where it comes out, and it actually dips up into this pocket here and blows it straight through that cooler. So I think I'm going to find a lot of things on this car that are pretty neatly engineered as I take it apart, but I just thought that was really cool and wanted to share that. They all have this two-piece drive shaft set up going through here in a tunnel fashion just like this, and the exhaust runs through here, and there's a lot of heat shields and all that stuff in the way. Typical for pretty much everything. Your new Camaros, 5th gen, 6th gen are the same way. All of the Mustangs, I don't know when, 11 up maybe, or 9 up, they're at least all of them are made similar to this. So that's going to be similar on every car as far as how you get the exhaust off. But the next thing to note, this is a Dark Horse, so we're actually working with a Tremec TR3160 instead of the MT82. So it's going to look a little bit different down here. You can see this one has cooler lines plumbed to it, and they have this sweet catalytic converter made to the exhaust manifold. Not a fan of that, but everything's kind of squeezed in here pretty tight. But we are going to take this stuff apart. One of the things that we're going to do once we get this transmission out is we're actually going to take it back over to TIC, and we're going to bust it apart, and we're going to inspect all the different parts inside of it and see if there's anything we can do to improve the durability of this transmission. along with doing our normal, you know, cryo treat and rim polish service to the transmission itself before we put it back in the car. So let's see if we can get this thing out. When you're pulling the drive shaft out, be careful not to just back these bolts all the way out, because there is the potential that this thing could fall and land on your head.
Are you good?
Yeah. And for us, this one's stuck in there. So I'll grab this little pry bar and pry this end of it. Just like that. This has a spot in the yoke where you can put maybe a flat head or something in there and pop that loose. So that's what I choose to do. Just like that. And we can finish removing that end. And out comes the drive shaft. Might put us a carbon shaft in this thing because that's a little too heavy. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is get these lines out of the way, and if you'll notice, they are metal where they plug into the trans at, and they're metal plumb past the front of the engine. If you can even see up there to where they're rubber in this video. So basically, to make this where you can work on it, you're going to have to loosen all the brackets that hold these lines on, including this one that's up here attached to the bottom of this engine mount. That way it's completely disconnected where it's solid between the trans and the rubber. That way you can pull these things over and get them out of your way. We're also going to go ahead and drain this fluid before we try to remove the trans. So I used to watch YOLO douchebag clips all the time years ago because he would make funny videos mainly directed toward General Motors guys because he's a Ford guy, he's a tuner. Really good one, in fact. He's Alejandro Flores on YouTube if you want to check him out. But now that I have a Ford, I feel like I'm finally not a target anymore, and that makes me feel so good. Undo these transmission lines now. This is an 8mm headed bolt. We're going to pop these out and we're going to try to not make a mess if we can. We drained the fluid already, but something tells me, much like any transmission line, no matter if it's an automatic or a manual, they're just going to continue to drip. Sometime between now and the end of time, they'll eventually quit dripping. Hey! Nobody told you quit. I'm actually going to go ahead and disconnect all the electrical connections that I can get disconnected as well and get those out of the way while I'm at it. It looks like this entire harness is held up at pretty much all of these connection points. Alright. Transmission mount. Now we can loosen the bolts for the cross member and get it down out of the way. Careful not to drop everything. Alright, so we took the whole mount and everything out of the way just to make sure we had plenty of clearance to get in here and work around to get these wiring and things loose. Also, we took Also, we need to drop the transmission down enough to be able to get the fastener out of this bracketry for the shifter itself. That way we can get the back of the trans out. For the record, I've already undone the air cleaners up front because you don't want those things to twist and try to come apart and stuff as your engine tilts backwards. Something that I like to do. Not everyone wants to do that, I guess, but that's just something that I've done over the years when doing stuff like this. So now, to this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see, because I don't know, I'm going to see how much more I can drop this transmission without causing interference issues anywhere. Right now, the oil pan's really close to the cross member, but I'm going to come down just a touch more. So the next thing I'm going to do in my process of doing this is go ahead and pull out those hard to get to bell housing bolts, the ones that are on top. Before I do anything else. Again, before I've pulled the transmission lines out, because I'm trying to avoid making a mess all over myself and all over everything that we're working with here. So I think what I'm going to try to do is actually do that and the connector for the release bearing last, because those are going to be the items that leak fluid. I'm going to try to do those two things last to avoid making a mess. If you've got a soggy wobble for your extension, put a piece of tape on it to help keep it straight as you're trying to feed it up through there. So this way, that tape on there, you can kind of just go ahead and move it to about the angle you think you're going to need. It'll kind of stay there as you fish it up through the transmission tunnel. Just like that. I'm just going to keep spinning this until I know that I've got that bolt backed out all the way, because the last thing you're going to try to do is put your hand up there and make sure you've got that bolt out. And it's all the way. Okay, so there we go. Now we can move on to the other one that's also up there that I can't see. All right, so now we need to take our lines loose and then tighten our chain up. So let's grab our 8mm wrench, finish taking that apart. I don't want to jinx us. It looks like draining the fluid may have been the ticket. There we go. All right, so now let's get this tightened up. My wing nut. Okay, now we're latched on pretty well. You can go ahead and disconnect the clutch fluid line, which is something that we're going to replace on this vehicle as we put it back together with an upgraded version that isn't plastic. So these have a quick disconnect on it, much like any GM or Dodge or anything like that. Just pop the clip out, as you can see there. It's a simple wire clip. They're all the same. General Motors, Chrysler, or Stellantis, however you want to call it. Yeah, just use a pick and you hook it. So you're just going to use a pick. Like this is what I like to use, and you're just going to hook it under the edge and push and rotate, and it'll just pop straight up. Don't lose that. If you do lose that, we sell them in 2-packs. If you're not careful, when you pick that thing, it'll just, because it's a piece of spring wire, so it's under tension, and when it untensions, it'll take off, and a lot of times you'll lose it. Technicians that do this every day, this kind of stuff every day, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Now we'll just disconnect the line. like that. And you're not going to stop that from leaking, because it is not a dry brake system. I don't know why we have gotten away from dry brake systems, but we have, unfortunately. Maybe we'll fix that. I think we've covered everything else. We should only have 2 bell housing bolts left, and we'll be able to pull this out. I am going to move my underside hoist over to the back of this oil pan right here on the edge, just in case the engine tries to dip too far after the transmission comes out. I have a feeling that it's actually going to want to go back up, but I don't actually know that, so I'm going to figure it out now. I still have one unknown, which is the breather line. I don't exactly know where that routes to, so I'm going to double check that very quick. And of course it has an attachment point. Alright, so I'm actually able to just reach my hand in there and unhook that breather from its attachment point on the back of the block. Almost forgot this underside hoist. I'm just going to catch the edge here. Just going to catch the edge where this drain plug is. Yes, I know it's going to rest on the drain plug, but trust me, it's not much weight and it's not a big deal.
There you go.
Alright, triple check this, make sure it's tight enough. Okay, make sure everything's out of the way. I'm going to pull it straight back a little bit. Make sure we're out of the input. We need to tip it back just a hair. Okay, then we can start easing it down. So now we can come around and get a look and see where our input shaft is at and make sure it's not hanging up. You can get a good, yeah, we can't see that yet. We can't see that yet. We'll get there. Looks like we need to come down some. Just down and back. Roll the trans over. It's actually going to loosen up on my chain a little bit, so tighten that back up. Okay, tip it back some and then continue just to work it out. Okay, and that is a 3160 removed. You check your blood pressure. So one thing you couldn't see when I was pulling this out is me actually reaching up and grabbing this breather and pulling it loose. So there's a tab on the back of the engine about right here that this this hooks into, and you kind of have to reach your arm up in there and grab it about like this and just pop it out before you can actually drop the transmission out. You know, alternatively, you could probably pull it loose from the nipple on the bell housing portion here as well, but I couldn't see that from where I was standing, and I also couldn't grab that as easily, so this is the way I would take it out. For those of you that are watching this video because you're interested in seeing how this comes out, or how the underside of a Dark Horse looks, or maybe just 24 up Mustang in general stuff, but maybe you don't know what the 3160 is. So this is the Tremec TR3160. It is basically a little brother to the TR6060 that comes in Challengers and Camaros. This transmission is also actually produced for the V6 Camaro 6-speed. And when I say little brother, I mean it's a smaller, more compact version of a 6-speed. So these cars are actually, this car in particular is actually 5th gear 1-to-1. I believe first gear ratio is 325 in these transmissions. It's meant to be like a close ratio deal because these cars are meant for, you know, driving on road courses and autocrossing and things like that. They were kind of geared toward being that type of car, so they put this 5th gear 1-to-1 setup in it. That way you're always in a more desirable RPM range with the Coyote engine. So it is different than a 6060 in multiple ways. Nothing externally is going to be the same. Obviously the bolt pattern where it bolts to the engine is going to be the same, but that's literally it. When I say it's smaller, I mean like the counter shaft, lay shaft, cluster gear, whatever you want to call it, and main shaft are actually physically closer together. And the reason they do that is so they can squeeze that case size down. And what it does is makes the gears and everything smaller in diameter in order to make it more compact. So one thing about these transmissions is that they are much weaker than a TR6060 is. So they have their limitations. They are good in some aspects. So if you're autocrossing, road racing, and you're going to keep this car naturally aspirated, and just enjoy it as a driver, there's nothing wrong with this assembly. They can be rebuilt. We're actually going to look through these to be able to do some upgrades to them to make them a little stronger, make them handle a little more torque. But yeah, so not a 6060 at all, basically a little brother to it, and they do really well for what they were intended to be used with. I do want to show you something. This transmission has roughly 280 miles on it, and I'm going to say a few of those miles have been a little bit aggressive because I wanted to see how the car acted and how it shifted and things like that before we pulled anything apart. So it does have a little bit of abuse on it, but I want you to come around here and look at this factory release bearing and how it has already slung a bunch of grease out of the bearing itself in a matter of 280 miles. So yeah, not a fan of seeing that. In a way I am, in a way I'm not. So we're going to make replacement release bearings for these things. So, you know, we'll solve this problem, but it's kind of crazy to see that with this low mileage vehicle. So we're going to be pulling this transmission apart in the next few days, and we're also going to make a video on that, of how it comes apart, how it's made, the things we're going to do to it, and us putting it back together. And some of that stuff may be time-lapsed in there to kind of consolidate and make it a little bit shorter of a video. But we are going to show you guys that stuff too, because we think it's interesting and we hope you do as well.